Welcome to the start of this section. We're now going to take a look at JavaScript and we're going to move over from the browser and actually into our own JavaScript files. So from the previous section, we downloaded the starter files which come with this course. And if you haven't downloaded these, make sure to go back to that video and download these from GitHub. Once this is done, you will need to unzip the package and drag this into Visual Studio Code to open this up. And on the right, I've opened up Google Chrome as the browser. So what we're going to do now is to begin right at the start and take a look at exactly where we can add JavaScript into our files. Earlier we have typed code directly into the browser's console, but realistically it's almost always wrote in our own files. So where do we start? Well, inside of Visual Studio Code in our starter files, head into our first section, which is the JavaScript Basics. And you will notice that the file numbers begin at 02. This is because for this particular lesson, we're going to begin right at the start and set things up ourselves. And then for all of the rest of the lessons, these will have some boilerplate available for us to access. So we can just jump straight into writing our JavaScript code. So for this one, with the JavaScript Basics selected, click on this icon here, which is to create a new folder. And then this can be 01. And we'll call this where to add JavaScript. Again, make sure this is inside of the JavaScript Basics folder. And then with this first folder selected, click on this icon here, which is a new file. And this will open up inside of here. We'll call this the index.html. Hit enter. And this should be inside of our new folder. We then need to add some basic HTML structure to open this up inside the browser, and Visual Studio Code comes with a plugin already built in called Emmet. This will give us some code completion and some simple shortcuts, and one of the most useful ones is HTML:5. Hit enter, and this will give us all of the basic HTML start code which we need. Again, this is all going to be available in all of the other folders, so this is just for this lesson only. The title, where to add JavaScript, and then we need an element to actually work with, such as a page heading. So placing anything such as a H1 and some text inside of here. Having this element in place here means we can use some JavaScript to access this element, just like we looked at in the console earlier. All we need to do to open this up inside the browser is to save this file with Command or Control S. And then if we right click on this file name just here, go down to copy path, and then we can paste this inside the browser. Alternatively, if you want to, you can go inside of the main folder just here. You can then follow through to the current folder and double click on this index page. This will then open this up in your default browser. To be able to access this element using JavaScript, one of the ways we can do this is to add a ID. I'm going to give this an ID of title. Remember that each particular ID should be unique to this HTML page. So make sure we only have one ID of title inside of this HTML file. And this makes it nice and easy for JavaScript to be able to select the particular element which we want. Then below this and just above our closing body tag, we can insert our script tags. So we have an opening tag and also a closing tag too. And this is the location where we can place our JavaScript code. Just above the body is one location where we can add JavaScript, and there's also other locations which we'll look at soon. Earlier, when we worked inside the console, remember we looked at selecting each particular element with $0. And also remember we said that this is unique to the console, so we need a different way of selecting our elements inside of the text editor. Well, inside of here, we're going to do the exact same thing we looked at in the console, where we first select the document. The document is this full HTML document which we are currently working in. So it's going to select this, and then we need to filter down this document to the particular element which we want to select. Remember, we looked at a method called getElementById. And again, this is camel case, so each and every word after the first one begins with a capital. Inside the brackets, And then the quotations will then pass in a unique ID which you want to select. In our case, we're going to grab the title. So move this into here. And we looked at changing the inner contents or the inner text of this element with .inner text. This is a property where we can add a new text string in between the single or the double quotations. Let's just change this to JavaScript for now. Save this file, and then if we go over to the browser and reload, this has now selected our level 1 heading and changed the inner HTML. Let's just close down this sidebar to get a little bit more space. And all of the same properties we looked at in the console video still apply too, such as adding different styles. Again, we can access the same element with getElementById, and we can also change the styles for this particular element too. Let's change the text color to be equal to orange. Refresh, and this will all apply. Another way of adding JavaScript is to add this inline. Adding this inline means we add it directly inside of our elements, and we add this inside of the element's opening tag. And we add this just like we would add some inline CSS. In an earlier video, we looked at events very briefly, where we looked at the onMouseOver event. Here, let's take a look at the onClick event, which will be triggered when the user clicks on this particular element. So all we're going to do inside of this onClick event handler is to trigger an alert. An alert is a pop-up inside the browser, and let's just add this with the text of clicked. Give this a save and refresh the browser. Move the mouse over to the element and click, and we'll now see a page alert. This is probably something which you've seen when browsing the web in the past. All we need to do to remove this is to click on the OK button, and this will then be closed. Let's just remove this. And also just be aware that it is generally discouraged to keep our JavaScript inline just like this, because it mixes up our HTML and our JavaScript and makes things less readable and organized. So if possible, keep it all separate just like we have here, and we'll also look at how we can add this into a separate file in just a moment. So this is contained inside of a script tag, and we can add as many script tags as we want. And it can also be located anywhere on this page too, including up inside of the head section. This works in exactly the same way. If we grab all of this script section, and then Command or Control X to cut this out of place, place this inside of the head section with Command or Control V to paste this in, and over to the browser, and inside of here we can see the original page title is reinstated. So now since we've moved this script tag up to the head section, none of this JavaScript seems to be applying. So let's take a look inside the console and see if we can spot any errors. Right click and inspect, and click on the console tab at the top. We see we cannot set the property inner text of null. So when we do get an error, it's often a good idea to head into the console, and it will often give us a pointer to exactly what the problem is. The current problem is caused because a HTML page is loaded from top to bottom. So the script inside of the head section is loaded before it even knows this title element exists, which is then causing the error. So if we do need to add a script inside the head section like this, it can often cause problems if we need to access any of our DOM elements. And this is why we often see JavaScript at the end of the body section, so it allows the elements to be loaded first and doesn't block the HTML from loading onto the page. You will, however, see some third-party JavaScript libraries which need the script to be loaded inside of the head section for the library to function correctly. Also, these third-party libraries, along with our own code, is usually separated into its own script file. Moving all of this JavaScript into its own file will make this HTML document much more readable and maintainable. To do this, first open up the sidebar, and then inside of the Where to Add JavaScript folder, click on the new file icon, and then we can give this a name of our choice. I'm going to go for script1, and then this needs to have the .js extension. Hit enter. Back into our index page, we can copy the content between the script tags. So grab these 2 lines of code, cut these out, paste these into our new script file. This script file doesn't need the surrounding script tags, since we already know this is a JavaScript file from the .js extension. But what we do need to do is to link these two files together. Currently, these are two separate files independent of each other. So over in the index file, we need to point to this new script file. And we can do this inside of the script tags, rather than having the code located inside like we did before. What we can do is to add the source attribute. The source attribute is basically the location of this file relative to where we currently are. And this works exactly the same as adding a style sheet. Since this file is alongside each other, we can point to this with the source of script1.js. If this was located inside of a JavaScript folder, for example, we would need to go into the JavaScript folder and then / into our script. We don't have this, so it's simply script1.js. Make sure both of our files are saved and then over to the browser, refresh, and we see the same issue inside the browser. We cannot set the property inner text of null. So this makes sense because we are still loading up the script tag inside of the head section, and we're trying to apply this to an element before it's even been loaded. We could write some custom code to wait for the HTML to load first, or we can look at some more modern techniques in the upcoming video.